Hello, I'm Linda Garbe.
And I'm Nancy Seidler. We're sisters and collaborators. This is the story of our journey to create this sculpture we call Wisteria.
We have a really good friend who's fond of saying, sometimes I just get to where I wasn't going. And that is exactly what happened when we created this. We had no intention of creating this tree, but we started out in one direction and this is where we ended up. And that's how creativity often is. And we're doing this video to show you the challenges involved with our collaboration, which was not always easy. This project challenged our skills, our patience, and our nerves. But we would say that we are pleased with the finished product, and we hope that sharing our experience will encourage you to collaborate with someone. Not necessarily someone who has the same style as you do, but someone very different, so you can create a unique piece. My style when I work with polymer clay is to grab chunks of different colors and just start creating. And I'm fond of creating whimsical things, and I also like to write stories to inspire my creations.
I'm addicted to the challenge of creating Kumihimo patterns ever since I took a class from Adrian Castell.
Our very different styles made for a very strong collaboration, but not an easy collaboration. So you will see in this journey some of that give and take that was necessary to create this. Quite frankly, during the experience, we often thought we spoke two different languages.
Here is one of our early collaborations. As we did more collaborating, we moved on to more complicated pieces. When we discovered wonderful colored O-rings, we incorporated them into our designs.
Eventually, we created large statement necklaces inspired by stories I wrote. You can hear the stories and see how each piece was created at Garbe Designs on YouTube. As you can see, our collaborations have gotten more complex and larger over time. So how did we get from these pieces to creating Wisteria? It started with one question: how can we incorporate Kumihimo into polymer pins?
The challenge was to move from creating long cords we had been using in our necklaces to making smaller pieces that could be used in pins. Here are some of our early experiments. This one looked promising. The beads could be wrapped in polymer. We thought they could be grouped together to create a pin.
This experiment reminded me of wisteria blossoms. Out of curiosity, which is how most creative adventures begin, we Googled wisteria. The photos of huge vines with wonderful canopies and blossoms were simply beautiful. Around the time we were doing all these experiments, I was reading The Language of Flowers by Vanessa Deffenbaugh. The book talks about how Victorians used the hidden meaning of flowers to communicate feelings. For example, a rose meant beauty, a violet stood for innocence, and wisteria stood for playfulness and youth. This information led to another question: what would happen to a child who was named Wisteria? And so I began writing, and we began creating the tree.
My first question was, how many blossoms will we need?
My answer: we won't know till we get to the top of the tree made.
How tall will the tree be?
My answer: I'll figure that out once I get the trunk finished. I wanted to start to experiment with the elements, the leaves, blossoms, and the bark, to see how we might use them.
I wanted answers before we started.
I wanted to start before we knew the answers. And so the challenges began. Because the entire piece evolved from one sample blossom, it was clear that the piece would not be botanically accurate. It would be a stylized interpretation of wisteria. We looked at photos of Tiffany's wisteria lamps for inspiration. As you can see, his designs are stylized also. At this point, we decided the vines and blossoms would be made of beads and everything else would be clay.
The blossoms were easy to braid because they were based on a sample pattern from the pin experiments. We needed a variety in color, size, and pattern, so I created 6 different patterns in 2 sizes. We selected beads in shades of purple and blue and used 4 sizes of beads to make each blossom. Because we decided to create a light and a dark side for the tree, some blossoms are lighter and brighter, and some are darker. After I produced the first 58 blossoms, Linda asked for more. After I completed those, she asked for more, and after those, she needed even more. By the time Wisteria was done, 99 blossoms had been placed among her leaves.
Due to the large size of the piece, we realized we would need to construct it in sections. This created many complications. We did numerous experiments with how to connect the sections. To begin the base, I made a mound of clay for the tree to stand on by curing a sheet of clay over a glass from a ceiling light. Once cured, the clay was removed from the glass. A mailing tube was then inserted in the middle of the mound and the underside packed with clay to make a solid base for the dome. The bark needed to be a range of colors that would provide visual texture but not overpower the beaded vines. Colors were mixed and clay strips run through the pasta machine. The ragged edges of the strips simulated the rough bark. I added texture to the trunk once all the strips were applied. In order to cure the trunk in the oven, I covered a cardboard form that I had strategically cut in two. I inserted pins along the cut line so I could locate it after I applied the clay. This allowed me to separate the pieces before they were cured. Once reassembled, they were spliced and the vines covered the cuts.
The wisteria blossoms were easy for me. The vines were not. Determining what the vines were to look like was the first challenge. Inspiration came from an experiment I did years ago. After braiding a bicone shape, I decided I wanted a larger center, so I incorporated larger seed beads and additional large crystal beads. This sample convinced Linda that some combination of seed beads and crystals would be perfect for the vines. Designing a pattern to produce vines which would gracefully curve up and around the trunk while getting smaller as they moved toward the top of the tree was the most challenging Kumihimo project I ever attempted. To create the vines, I had to allow for the different dimensions of seed beads and crystals. 6 sizes of seed beads and 6 sizes of crystals had to be used to cause the vine to taper as they moved up the tree and across the canopy. Attempts to split the braid to create branches did not produce appropriate results, so we decided to stitch each branch to the main vine. Finding the materials was also a problem. To get the correct colors and sizes of the beads and crystals, we used 4 sources and had to place multiple orders to complete the 12.5 feet of braided vines on wisteria.
From my first attempt to make the base for the treetop, I learned the clay dome had to be made in one piece. The next attempt, I covered a glass dome with paper mache, allowed it to dry, cut it off the glass mold, and taped it together. This was then covered with a thick sheet of clay and cured in the oven. The cured piece, mold and all, was soaked in water until the paper mache softened enough to be removed. This meant the clay was all in one piece and much stronger than my first attempt. Just as we had a variety of color combinations in the blossoms, we needed a variety of colors for the leaves. I built a form to use for curing all the leaves. This gave them a curved shape which matched the curve of the clay dome. I made what I thought was more than enough leaves, and then I made more, and then I made more. The grass needed to match the style of the leaves without looking like a pile of leaves. After several experiments, this was the idea we settled on. Stones and dirt were mixed in with the grass to make it more interesting and add texture. I placed several colors of raw clay in the food processor to break it down into small pieces. After the clay was cured, this dirt was applied to the base along with the grass and the stones.
Even when we got to the point we thought we knew the answers to some of the questions, we would find we had to revise our plans. It was not until we were assembling the piece we finally had all the answers. Along the way, the trunk started to collapse. The roots started to separate from the trunk, and the canopy seemed to devour leaves and blossoms. We found ourselves making more and more pieces. The armature had to be reinforced, and we came close to standing on our heads as we attached the vines to the tree. While we had estimated the length of each section of vine, The actual placement on the trunk could only be established as we worked our way from the base to the top of the tree.
From the beginning, we knew we wanted one side of the tree to appear to be in the shade and the other in the light. This would give visual interest as people moved around the piece to see it. Once Wisteria was completed, we felt we had succeeded in creating a smooth transition from light to dark.
Getting the resolution to each problem leads to another problem. We spent many months working through these problems. How many hours did it take to make? We don't know, but you can learn how long it takes to make one wisteria blossom on the YouTube entitled Wisteria Blossom.
As I said before, it wasn't easy. It was hard work, but this is proof that two people with very different styles can successfully collaborate. And it also shows that sometimes you just get to where you weren't going. We hope you will be inspired to go out, collaborate with someone, and just get out there and go someplace you weren't going.